Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin the meeting for the Utah County Boundary Commission on December 3rd, 2025. It's approximately 5:31 p.m. Without having any sitting members yet, we need to first administer oaths to the elected members of the Utah County Boundary Commission.
I state your name. Anthony Canto. Do solemnly swear that I will support, obey, and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Utah, and that I will discharge the duties of my office with fidelity.
Thank you, Commissioners. On October 30th of this year, 3 public members were chosen and appointed by the 4 of you elected members to serve on this Boundary Commission. We need to ratify the appointments of Richard Morley and Terry Lyman as public members of the Utah County Boundary Commission with terms expiring January 3rd, 2028. We need a motion and a vote.
I move to ratify those names.
And I'll second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? On the same date, Mark Fuchs was appointed. We need to ratify that appointment as a public member of the Utah County Boundary Commission with a term expiring on January 4th, 2027. We need a motion and a vote.
Motion to ratify.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We need those 3 public members of the Utah County Boundary Commission to take their place on the stand and be administered oath.
Is there another chair over there?
Yes.
There's 2 over there. Can I get the little chair?
You can have that in the back. Willie card.
Please stand.
Okay. It's the little chair.
I, Richard Morley,
Do
do solemnly swear
that I will support, obey, and defend
I will support, obey, and defend
the Constitution of the United States
the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of
and the Constitution of the State of
Utah,
Utah,
and that I will discharge
and that I will discharge
the duties of my office
the duties of my office
with fidelity.
with fidelity.
want it on the whole time. Okay.
Thank you, Commissioners. We now need you as a body to nominate and approve a chairperson for the Utah County Boundary Commission for a 2-year term.
I'd like to nominate Mayor Carla Merrill.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
Congratulations, Chairman. I will now turn it over to you. If you need any assistance, staff is available to help you. The next item is approved minutes.
So, yeah, a technicality. Can we approve the minutes since none of us were at that meeting?
So there was one person on your commission that was. So if you want to look to her, you would look to her, but yes, you would need to approve those minutes. You're the only board we have to do
Okay.
that.
Okay, no. Okay, we'll move on to the next item, the approval of minutes from the meeting of January 4th, 20. No,
November.
that's not it.
November 8th.
November 8th, 2021 was the last boundary commission.
2021.
2021.
Yeah.
Did you want to make the motion?
Yes, I would motion that we approve the minutes from the November 8th, 2021 meeting of the Utah County Boundary Commission.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Now let's go to the meat and potatoes. So we will be moving on to the annexation of the Brent Money annexation between Spanish Fork and Springville City. Who do I turn it over to? Are you
Chair.
guys going to be summary or no?
Chair, I would propose, we don't have a staff report. There's
Okay.
nothing for that for the Boundary Commission. I would propose, and you can follow any order that you would like, that Springville City go first to present the protest. You're here to they will outline what they think is deficient in the annexation petition. If the applicant were here, I think the applicant should go next. That's Mr. Money. You also need to hear from Spanish Fork City. They have an interest in the annexation since they're the annexing municipality. And then we'll need to open it up to a public hearing.
Okay. Will do. So do we have a representative from Springville City?
Yes, thank you, Chairperson. My name is John Penrod. I'm the city attorney for Springville City. And I just want to thank the Boundary Commission for their time tonight. I know that it's a lot of work to come to these after-hour meetings and to sit here and listen to all the arguments and make the decisions. I also am very grateful for Spanish Fork City in the sense that I've grown up in Springville. They've been right there, right by us our whole time. They've been a big part of my life. And I've only met Mr. Money once in person, spoken to him a couple of times, but I've heard so many great things about him. And so I just think the world of him as well. You did receive a statement from us yesterday. I apologize that it was so late getting to you, but hopefully you've had some time to look through that. And also, hopefully, and I would ask that it be part of the record. I'm not going to hit every point in that statement, but I'm going to hit those things that I think are most important. First off, this board or this commission has not met since 2021. When we talk about an annexation policy plan, does that make sense to everybody of what it is and that sort of thing? Okay, I just want to make sure. If I could get the next slide. As I look at this and as Springville looks at this, one of the big questions I think we have is, does an annexation policy plan mean something? Or is it just a box to check off as you're going through some kind of annexation process? And we'll get into that a little bit more because to us at Springville, it means something and it has meant something for quite a while with respect to this property. This commission, to the criteria that you're supposed to look at, and if I could get you to check, to click that, deals with, does the petition meet the requirements of state law? And those requirements are found in sections 10-804, 806, and then also the annexation policy plan as described in 10-803. And then a key thing there is, does it conflict with the annexation policy plan of another municipality? And that's where we have been kind of surprised that Spanish Fork has even moved forward with this, because it's in our annexation policy plan. And we'll get to that in just a minute. If I could get you to click. With respect to the purpose of an annexation policy plan, there's a lot of different purposes. Here's a few purposes here before you. Is to follow Utah code, provide orderly growth, do long-term land use planning, ensure infrastructure capacity, all those things. This last one, though, is one that is really important, and that is maintain interlocal cooperation and expectations. At Springville, if somebody came in to our planning department and they wanted to be annexed into Springville, the first thing we'd look at is it in our annexation plan? And if it was, we'd move forward. But if it was in another city's annexation plan, we would simply say, hey, you've got to go to that city because it's in their plan. That's the plan that we've all kind of looked at, or the plans we look at to determine where something should be annexed. We were surprised that Spanish Fork didn't do that on this, because the money property was in our annexation plan and only in our annexation plan, not in Spanish Fork's when this started. If I could get you to go to the next slide there. One of the key things, and this is in state law, and it's in section 10-803. If you could click it again. One of the first things you're supposed to do when you develop an annexation policy plan is, in preparing a proposed annexation policy plan, the Planning Commission shall attempt to avoid gaps between and overlaps with the expansion areas of other municipalities. Now, that's something that you have to do. And I know that you start reading that and it says shall, and then you go to an attempt. Now, attempt by itself isn't that strong, but a shall attempt is strong. If you were to look at this language, and if the law said you shall attempt to avoid robbing a bank, and then you go rob that bank, you're in violation of that law. In this case, you shall attempt to avoid overlaps with another municipality. Just because you go do it doesn't make it right. You need to make sure that you don't overlap your expansion area and your plan with another municipalities. If I could get you to click there. Again, this is not a balancing test. This is one of 6 items that must be followed when you prepare a plan. And the reason why I'm going over this is pretty important, these annexation policy plans. When I say pretty important, very important when it comes to annexation. This, again, is the first thing you're supposed to do when you're looking at an annexation policy plan. Can I get you to click again? This was adopted in 2001. The reason why I say that this was adopted as state law in 2001 is because I would assume that the word attempt might be in there for that reason. Back in 2001, you couldn't just go click on the internet and find everybody's plans pretty quickly. And so I think it was back then they probably put the word attempt because it was harder to figure out, okay, who has what property and what plan. Can I get you to click again? Now, it is our position that if it is in your annexation policy plan and you're the first one to have it in your plan, that should be honored. It must be honored. According to state law, the first thing that you look at before you even start the plan is you look at avoiding overlaps in other municipalities' plans. So our position is ours should be honored. This petition shouldn't go forward underneath what you're supposed to look at when it comes to conflicts with other municipality plans. And then if you don't mind just clicking. And in reality, there should never be 2 plans that have conflicts moving forward, because everybody knows now what properties are in what other cities' expansion areas, and it should be very clear and very easy to avoid those. Can I get you to click there? This right here, this map that's before you, just to kind of show you how long the information's been out there. This is a map from Springville's comprehensive plan dating back to 1983. So it's over 40 years old. And if you look at this, if you could click again, in this comprehensive plan, it specifically says underneath the annexation policy declaration, and that's what an annexation policy plan was called before they switched to in-state law. The growth area of Springville has been established by negotiation agreement with Utah County and the neighboring cities. The growth area is depicted by heavy outline on all the maps of Springville that are presented in this report. Now, if you look up to the left of this map where it says, I believe 1E, that area is the area we're talking about. In fact, if you click again, this right here that came up green, that's the money property. So this has been in Springville's growth area or expansion area for over 40 years. And so it's something that has been well established. If you go back to the purposes of what the annexation policy plan is all about, we've been planning for this area. We've been doing all kinds of things with respect to master plans for infrastructure and other such things to make sure that this can come into the city. There's even been a little bit of upsizing going on in different infrastructure to make sure that, again, this property can come into Springville City. And if you could, just click one more time. This right here is a plan that was adopted in 2011. You can see now Springville, from that 1983 to this 2011 plan, has come up to the money property. If you click just one more, again, the money property is there in the green. And this really is the last property that's in the plan on the west side to be put into to Springville. And it's been in our plan for a long, long time, over 40 years. Spanish Fork adopted it and put it in their plan 15 days ago. And so when it comes to conflicts, when it comes to those type of things, it never should have been put into Spanish Fork's plan. We were the first, meaning Springville, to put it in our plan, and that should be honored. I would like, if I could, before I conclude, have our mayor come up here. Again, this is something that's coming from our legislative body, this plan and the petition, and I'd like to have him say a few words. Is that okay, Chairperson?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Well, Commissioners, thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be here. And again, I wish we weren't here, but we are here. And so I appreciate your efforts in being able to hear kind of both sides and to make a decision. Let me take you back in history, back into the 90s. Some of you were in high school. I was actually on the Springville City Council back in the 90s. And there was a arms race that really was between ourselves and Spanish Fork City. It was along the freeway frontage. Properties were being annexed by both cities as they raced to get sales tax base for properties. It was not a good situation. There was a great deal of animosity between cities, and it was very, very unhealthy. It eventually ended as eventually all the properties went one way or the other, but there was a lingering feeling of animosity, certainly between Springville and Spanish Fork, and it was not healthy between those two cities. We were really grateful for the state and the county coming together and putting together this annexation policy plan, which not only helped cities be able to outline and do what they needed to do for long-term growth, but it created and delineated where the boundaries of certain cities were supposed to go. It helped get away from this arms race and to create good feeling between cities. Down in this area where the money property is, there's certainly been other properties that have come up for annexation, and the city has worked with developers. The city has worked with Spanish Fork City to be able to work their way through those properties without ending up in some sort of a conflict that we're here tonight for. So we've been able to work through the money property is a property that we feel like that we have in our declaration. It's a property that we feel that we can service. The property to the west of the money property went to Spanish Fork as we worked with the developer. As we understood it, the monies, I'd heard that the monies went to the developer and wanted to be part of the overall annexation into Spanish Fork, and that was turned down as we understand it. These are unvalidated comments, but that's what we understood. So we thought that the monies were not ready to develop that property, and so we were very happy to continue to look at it. The property that is directly to the east of it is in the process of conversation with developers, so it's not that far away from being able to have the utilities there. We have in our city, and there's development going to the east of that property and to north of that property where actual development is going on and homes are being built. So in our estimation, as we looked at this property for the money, as a legislative body, as a city council, we said when we allowed that property to go into Spanish Fork, that is on the west side of the money property, that that property line on the west side of the money property was the where we were going to hold the line as far as the city was concerned, because we felt like we could take care of those things in a very reasonable period of time. So that's the reason that we made the decision of what we did, and that's the reason for our protest here tonight. It's not because we're against the monies. They're wonderful people. I've known them for many years, the family. They're very good people. But it's something that we feel like that it's should be in Springville. Frankly, I was quite surprised with Spanish Fork. It was not in their declaration. I can't understand why they would accept a petition to change the boundary on their part. I don't understand why a planning commission approved it. I don't understand why city council approved it. We have met with Spanish Fork City on a number of occasions to try to resolve this with Spanish Fork in regard to this money piece, but it has not been resolved. We met the night before the city council met in relationship to this on the 17th of November, in which we had a meeting with the mayor, the city manager, myself and our city manager, 2 city council people from theirs and 2 city council from ours to try to talk through this. They were very gracious in allowing us to be able to express our frustrations and concerns. It was my understanding, it was my feeling, and again, this is my feeling, that they said that they would go back to the city council and see what their feeling was in relationship to coming back and having a discussion with us. I anticipated that they would continue the item on that city council meeting that was meeting the next day, and come back with us in a week and be able to have further discussions on how we could perhaps resolve this issue. They went ahead and just made the vote, and we got a text that they had approved the change in the boundaries. So again, we feel like that we've dealt in good faith with Spanish Fork. We feel like we've dealt in good faith with the monies. But we're here tonight to protest it because we think that that property should be in. As you well know, that you have to be able to have these plans to create long-term planning for the city. You can't put big trunk lines in that eventually that go to properties that should have been in your property but are now in another city. So there's some financial implications for our cities. Back in the day when you had the arms race, what you were doing is that you could just creep your way right through into a city if you just keep pushing your utilities. And that's a very, very dangerous proposition and strategy to have. It just doesn't create good feelings. So I appreciate your time and being able to understand kind of what we're trying to do, and be welcome to have any questions if you have any. So,
Dale, are we able to ask questions?
maybe not now, but
Okay, okay, I have a question. When you talk
Sure.
about being able to service the property, how far out are you from servicing that?
Well, based upon the property that's between the monies and where the utilities are, as I understand it, they're in discussions with the developer, the property owners there, the Crandall family. And so from a timetable standpoint, I don't know, but we're talking within the property line. We're not talking miles away and many, many years away. At least that's not our understanding of the situation. So.
Okay, and then from a financial burden, when you talk about running trunk lines and all of the infrastructure to get out there, are you running those specifically to the money property, or is it everybody west of the freeway? Does the money property change what you would have done
Well,
from an infrastructure standpoint?
the answer is yes, because that was in our declared area. And so we're anticipating from an engineering side to service that area where that property is. So the answer would be yes, as I understand it. So
I just had a question on the timing. One of the bits of information we received said that it would take approximately 3 years to get infrastructure out there. Is that accurate? Is that close? Is there any? Do you have any information on that?
I don't have any information on that. I didn't come prepared to address that issue. So I honestly don't know. I wouldn't
Okay.
want to speculate. I can give you speculation, but that would be just exactly what it is, a speculation. But again, the property that's directly to the east of the money property is in conversation with a developer. And again, we were under the impression that the money property was not in play, if you will. I spoke directly with Mr. Money and asked him, I said, so have you made a contract with any developers? And he said, no. I said, are you talking to them? He said, yes. So that was the first time that we were aware of that he was in negotiation or conversation. We'd understood that he was going to continue farming. Now he can answer these questions much better than I can, but that was our understanding.
So I did have a question as far as planning for the infrastructure going out to the money property. What is the financial impact on Springville City if it goes to Spanish Fork?
Well, there are people here that could answer that better than I could, so I honestly don't know. So, I'll let Troy Fitzgerald come. He's a city administrator. He might be able to answer some of these more detailed questions. So I think maybe you can ask the question again. So,
Okay, thank you, Mayor. No, I was just wondering what the financial impact would be to Springville City if it did get annexed into Spanish Fork.
Primarily, I think there are two issues. Yeah, sure. Troy Fitzgerald, City Administrator for Springville City. I think the two things that come immediately to mind is, as Mayor Packard has already indicated, there's been engineering plans and upsizing of infrastructure that's working its way to this particular property. And then obviously, as it develops, there'll be a differential in value of property taxes and other development expenses that would come in. So those would be the two primary sources of impact to the city.
Does anybody else have any other questions? Okay, thank you.
If I could have you click on that. Thank you, Chairperson and Commissioners. On here, you'll see a couple of red shapes come up. This one right here has already been developed, so that kind of shows you how close development is coming. If you could click on, again, this area is under application, and then the mayor mentioned Crandall property. If you could click again, that's right there. And we have developers right now at the Crandall property coming and talking to our planning commission. So it is getting very, very close to the money property. Questions were asked about when will it get there. We don't know. I mean, we can't ever tell. I mean, some of you are developers, some of you have worked with developers. Things come and then they stop, and then they come and then they stop, and that's just how it is. I do know that everything to the west, though, it's all been developed in the last 3 years or so to the west of the money property. And so it could come pretty quickly. It really could. But again, it could be out there a ways as well. Now, when it comes to trunk lines and that sort of thing, definitely that's all planned for with our master plans and our impact fees and everything else. So it should get to the money property without cost to the money property as development comes. So hopefully that helps to answer your questions as well. If I could just get you to click one more time. Oh, actually stay on this if you could. Can you go back just one? So on this too, just to point out, one other thing is the mayor talked about a little bit about instead of going off of annexation policy plans, having just kind of an open field. If you get the infrastructure there first, then you can just annex whatever you want, and that's kind of what it feels like here. just because Spanish Fork got everything out there first, that, hey, let's just overlook what's in somebody else's annexation policy plan. And that's really not what the law says. I mean, the law says the first thing you look at is whether it's in somebody else's annexation plan, and you should attempt to avoid the overlapping of that. And in this case, it looks like, hey, we're just going to kind of push Springville out until, we're there and we can do it. And to us, that is not how it should happen. And it does break down the trust between two cities as you see that happen that way. If you wouldn't mind clicking. Click again. 40 years versus 15 days. It has been there. We have been expecting it. And then if you wouldn't click again, does the annexation policy plan mean something? Again, our position is yes, and the first annexation policy plan adopted should be honored. That's how it should work with orderly growth and making sure things are done to move forward. And then just the last click here. Our request for relief is to we would ask this commission to provide a written decision denying the proposed annexation because it doesn't meet state law and it conflicts with our annexation policy plan. In fact, we'd even ask now that 15 days ago, Spanish Fork put a plan in place for this property, that in that written order, they would be requested to remove that from their plan as well. Thank you so much, commissioners.
Thank you. Do we have Mr. Money or a representative from the Money family? You can come up and state your name.
Thank you first for your time and your efforts to hear this case. My name is Brent Money. Just a little bit of history. I am a fifth generation South Utah County farmer and rancher. It is not a hobby for me. It is what I do for a living. I have been a resident of Palmyra, Utah all of my life. My wife, Chris, and I are the owners of the piece of property that we are talking about tonight. This piece of property has been in the Money name for over 100 years. It is a vital piece of ground in my operation. For 8 months out of the year, for 8 months out of the year, this property is home to my cows. At the rapid pace of the development in the area, I have been increasingly uncomfortable in continuing to do what my property has been historically used for. I recognize that with development, the increase in traffic and people, it becomes harder and harder to run cows on this property. At some point, I will have to sell and relocate, or sell and cut back. At my age, the later option seems more likely. I am not sure that I can potentially wait 5, 10, or 15 years for Springville to develop to my east boundary when Spanish Fork's development is already on top of me. I believe that this commission's responsibility, other than to make sure that things are legal and done right, and I believe that Mr. Penrod and Spanish Fork's attorney, Mr. Patel, will argue those cases. I don't understand a lot of the code and stuff like that. But I also believe that this commission's responsibility is to make sure that the property owner of ground in unincorporated Utah County is treated fairly and equitably, like other properties in the area. It is also to make sure that a city or cities don't cause undue harm and harm with restrictions and limitations, and that the actions of a city won't devalue a piece of property, and to protect a person's private property rights. I know that you will act fairly and equitably. I'll just take a few minutes and explain why I want to be annexed into Spanish Fork City. And that I believe makes common sense for this piece of property. I truly wish I had the opportunity to have you stand at the corner of my property. To visualize this would make a huge difference. A few years ago, I think it was in 2022, GWC bought the property to my west and then proceeded to apply for annexation into Spanish Fork. They knew that this property was in Springville's annexation declaration area. Springville made them do a feasibility study to bring what it would cost to bring the utilities to that property. And I think you've have that document from Spanish Fork. I think it is also interesting to note that GWC is a Clyde company who has a long and historical ties with Springville City. If anyone should have had interest in going to Springville, I think it would have been them. And yet, they applied for annexation into Spanish Fork. Without much of a protest, with no protest here, or much of a protest from them, or many complaints from Springville City. They were allowed to annex into Spanish Fork City. Once annexed, they immediately began to move dirt. The development has moved very fast, and today they have completed most of the horizontal development, and 4 or 5 buildings are standing on this property. All of the utilities have been brought to my west boundary, all of them. Some of those, the gas and the electrical lines are on my property. I allowed part of my property to be used for the road so that it could be annexed, so that it could be done right. They have paved a road down the west side of my property line. The same type of development is moving very fast to the south of my property. Those lines that Springville seems so adamant should never change somehow didn't apply to the 300 acres that development sits on now, or to the 200 plus acres that was directly west of it that was also annexed into Spanish Fork at the same time. That property was also in Springville's annexation declaration. In fact, all of the property that was in Springville's annexation declaration has been annexed in Spanish Fork City, except for mine. Could you pull that map up that Springville had up there? Because I think that shows it. So that map right there, that red line, the yellow, that was in their area. All of it, except for my piece of ground, has been annexed into Spanish Fork. It is very hard for me to understand how Springville has now drawn a hard line that affects a single property owner. It seems very inconsiderate, arbitrary, and unfair to me. If Springville would have fought for the property west of me, I would have had no problem going into Springville. There would have been 600 to 700 acres that would have shared in the cost of bringing the utilities to the west side of Dry Creek. Now, there is just over 100 acres of developable ground that will have to stand that cost. I believe there is a natural boundary between the two cities. It is Dry Creek. Now, Dry Creek is more than a creek. There is a substantial amount of water that runs down there all year long. I would call it more of a river than a creek. uh, even if Springville was able to get the utilities and infrastructure to Dry Creek on the east side of my property where they're showing there, and I think they will, but I think the cost to get it on the west side of Dry Creek would not be cost effective to service a small 100 acres or so of ground. Spanish Fork has already made the high cost to cross Dry Creek. They will be able to recoup those costs with hundreds of acres as they are developed. To put the cost of crossing Dry Creek against a single property owner is unreasonable and unfair. Springville has never reached out to me. I have reached out to them. My wife and I did meet with Mayor Packard a couple of years ago. He told me at that time that they didn't even have a master plan for my area. I called their city planner earlier this year, spring, and I met with him on my property. I attended one of their city council meetings as directed to do so by Mr. Fitzgerald and expressed my desires to be annexed into Spanish Fork and why. I also met with Mr. Penrod a day or two before they filed their protest, and I also met with one of their city council members who did reach out to me, and I met him on the property. In all those meetings, I have never had them explain to me why my property is so important to Springville. I've never had them explain to me what their plans are. The only thing that they have mentioned to me is that they would like to preserve Dry Creek and the lakefront. The bottom end of this property is Utah Lake. And there are definitely a portion of this would be wetlands. Most of Dry Creek is in Springville City. It doesn't hit my property till about 2/3 of the way down. By that time, it is already in a flood zone and would be protected anyway. Other than that, they have given me no indication of what their plans were or how my property could be serviced by them. For some reason, Springville acts as if my property is already theirs. My property is not annexed into Springville City. It is in unincorporated Utah County. And I am not allowed, if I am not allowed to be annexed into Spanish Fork City, my property more than likely will remain in unincorporated Utah County until I have some type of explanation of what is planned for my property and when those utilities would reach my east boundary. Until that time, I would remain a peninsula in Utah, unincorporated Utah County. The only way that I can make decisions about my property is what is available today. Today, Spanish Fork City can service my property with all utilities. Today, I have developers that are interested in my property if it can be annexed into Spanish Fork City. Springville seems to think that it is not unreasonable for me to wait 5, 10, or 15 years for those utilities to reach my east boundary and have developers interested in my property. I do not believe that I can wait. The bottom line to me is this. Spanish Fork has agreed to allow me to seek annexation into their city. For that, I'm very grateful. It would have been very easy for them to just say, no, we don't want to have the hassle or cause hard feelings with our neighboring city. It is only about 130 acres of developable ground. It's not worth it. But I think out of common sense, out of fairness, and respecting the property owner's rights, they have made the hard choice to allow me to apply for annexation into their city. I believe that Mr. Piquel will outline the legal reasons why that is feasible and sound. Being annexed into Spanish Fork City does not make or break Spanish Fork. It is fairly insignificant when compared with the other developments in the area. My property being annexed into Springville City is also very insignificant to their plans. It will not affect or deter the development that will take place in Springville's West Fields over the next 5, 10, or 15 years. Which way my property can be annexed will greatly affect me and my family. By not allowing me to be annexed into Spanish Fork at this time, it will have a major consequence to the value of my property in lost development opportunities, delayed timelines, potential utility issues, and broader implications associated with uncertainty. I have put those values at somewhere around $150,000 an acre that I have potentially could lose. I would respectfully ask the Commission to support a property owner's rights to have some say on what happens to his property and to write a decision to approve the proposal of Brent Money's annexation into Spanish Fork City. Thank you for your time. I could answer some questions if you have any.
Does anybody have questions for Mr. Money? It appears there are no questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We appreciate your presentation. Now, do we have a representative from Spanish Fork City?
Jolyn.
Thank you, Mayor Merrill and Commissioners. My name is Vaughn Piquel. I represent Spanish Fork. I'm their city attorney. And I've come tonight hopefully just to explain the city's position and its process in evaluating the petition and in the recent decision to amend its annexation policy plan boundary. I asked the commission to do what we did, to evaluate the requirements in 10.2.804 and 806, the Spanish Fork City Annexation Policy Plan, and whether it will conflict with another city, which I admit to you, it does conflict because it is located in Springville's annexation policy boundary as well. What we did is a fairly mechanical application of the code. In 10.2.804, it talks about things like, is it a contiguous area? Is it contiguous to Spanish Fork? That's true. Does it leave or create an island or a peninsula? It doesn't do that. In fact, it would eliminate an existing peninsula that does not have access to any municipal services. Is it located in Spanish Fork's annexation policy plan expansion area? After the recent amendment, it does. I will also explain to you how we went through our annexation policy plan amendment and why they came to that difficult decision. Springville's primary objection was that it was not located in Spanish Fork's annexation policy plan. That is moved. The city council made that legislative decision, applied the guidelines in the state code and made that, approved that change. In 10.2.806, those criteria are also fairly simple and mechanical. Does the owner own a majority of the area? He's the sole owner, it's 100%. 1/3 of the value of the private real property. Again, 100% sole owners. Is the annexation drawn along boundaries of special districts, school districts, and other taxing entities? It won't affect any of those. It's within Nebo School District, it's within the South Utah Valley Solid Waste District boundaries, and it would be along as you know, the municipal boundary of Springville. Another factor, number 4 from 806, is does it eliminate islands and peninsulas that do not receive municipal debt services? Again, it will. It will eliminate an existing peninsula and allow that property to be served with municipal services that are available today. Does it facilitate consolidation of overlapping functions of local government? There really isn't an overlap right now. Spanish Fork's utilities are there, as he mentioned, on his doorstep, right there on frontage on the state highway, but also along his western boundary. It would avoid an overlap in the future. Springville would not have to come out. 6th is, does it promote the efficient delivery of services? I think it does. I think it involves it avoids, an inefficient, wasteful duplication of resources, but putting utilities where they already exist today. The third thing to do is to evaluate the city's annexation policy plan. It meets those elements of Spanish Fork's annexation policy plan. It's within its boundary. The plan discusses growth policies. It discusses orderly expansion and focuses really heavily on whether the city could provide utilities to a proposed annexation. That has already been solved. They're already there today. So those are the things, besides the conflict with Springville's annexation policy, it meets all of those criteria that are outlined in the state code. And so that's why Spanish Fork accepted the annexation petition for further consideration, just not to foreclose Mr. Money's options, but just to see where it goes. The reason, although it's not required of you to evaluate why Spanish Fork adopted its annexation policy plan boundary and amended it recently, I'll walk through those different elements there and explain those to you. There are 6 guidelines, and I'll call them that intentionally because of the language that's in the code. They're not mandatory. Any one of them is not required, but there are 6 guidelines for a city to consider in preparing their annexation policy plan. Now, this was an amendment of the plans. It didn't require a full readoption of the plan, but just the boundaries. The 6 guidelines use verbs that are very deferential to a legislative decision-making. They are words like consider, be guided by, and shall attempt to avoid. So shall consider, shall be guided by. That's really, really deferential. It's in the legislative realm. The first of those 6 is to attempt to avoid overlaps with other cities and expansion areas. Presumably, as I thought about it, the primary reason to attempt to avoid an overlap is to avoid duplicative, wasteful extension of utilities and provision of municipal services. Imagine 2 costly sewer lines in the same street, power lines on either side of the same street. That's just wasteful. In this instance, the reason behind that guideline has been satisfied. Utilities surround the property. There's no need to duplicate them. Another presumed reason, as I thought about it, and as Mayor Crandall discussed tonight, is avoid cities squabbling over territory, right? That makes sense to me. But history is, I haven't gone back as long as Mayor Crandall, but my recent history and then the decades that I looked at recently, maybe past that time that he mentioned, Springville and Spanish Fork have not done that. They have rather, history shows cooperation between the 2 cities. Historically, Spanish Fork has sent petitioners for annexation to Springville if it's located within their annexation policy boundary. I've heard these words uttered by our administration. You will not come to Spanish Fork but through Springville's front door. Go there first. I've said those to another property owner, even seeking to connect to our utilities, but not even annexation. As recently in 2023, as Brent Money mentioned, was the GWC development that annexed the large 320 acres immediately west of there, as shown on that map I don't know if that would be helpful if you could put that back up just for reference. The area in yellow west of the Green property is the Stockman Flats annexation, the GWC. Went to Springville, and they were asked to do feasibility studies for providing those utilities. I submitted those studies, copies of those to you with the Spanish Fork submission. In short, they concluded it'd be very costly to extend those facilities to the west past Dry Creek with force mains, sewer mains of over 13,000 feet long, and 3 years was the timeline there given in those feasibility studies. The Springville annexation policy boundary overlaps Spanish Forks significantly over a very large area. All that area south of Highway 77, that dark line through the middle, that's in Spanish Forks policy boundary, and Springville's overlap there. Once the Stockman Flats annexation came in, Spanish Fork had to serve it. We had to bring utilities out to it. We didn't seek it out. It came to us. We sent them to Springville. And then with the feasibility study came in back the way it did, they were allowed to annex to Spanish Fork. Spanish Fork has since invested a lot, millions and millions, to bring utilities out to not just Stockman Flats, but it runs right across Brent Money's frontage, and it serves other areas to the west and south of there. To illustrate more of the Spanish Fork and Springville's cooperation through the years, the cities have worked together, and they've made decisions based on who can serve the area most efficiently. For example, there are 6 annexations to Spanish Fork that are within Springville's annexation policy boundary that hasn't been amended. And they're very recent. One was in 2021. There were 2 in 2023, including the large Stockman Flats annexation that borders Mr. Money's property. And there was even one this year that was in that annexation area of Springville that was allowed to annex into Spanish Fork. So that begs the question, why now? Why this one? Why this line? I don't have an answer for that. Right now, that property is being developed in a very heavy, large-scale industrial project. The cities have also agreed to boundary adjustments over the years. I was involved in one for Young Living in 2021. There was others in 2018 and 2011. I think there's reasons for justifying those 6 previous annexations based on the ability to serve infrastructure apply to Mr. Money's as well. I want to point this out. This is important. Spanish Fork did not seek out this annexation. We didn't ask him to apply. We didn't, we're not seeking after tax revenue or anything like that. Mr. Money came to the city and submitted a petition. And he also submitted an application to amend the general plan, the annexation policy boundary. It was that caused Spanish Fork to even be involved and to respond and to evaluate those requests. The second of the 6 principles or guidelines in adopting an annexation policy plan is to consider population growth projections for 20 years. As has been demonstrated, the population is growing elsewhere in the city, but here it's really focused on industrial development, and the pressure is real. Buildings are going up. There's concrete tilt-up walls happening right next to his pasture with his cattle. The third of the 6 is to consider costs of infrastructure, urban services, and public facilities to facilitate full development and to expand the infrastructure services and facilities into the area. Those costs have been evaluated and they've been provided already. As I mentioned, Spanish Fork invested heavily to serve that area. And the cost is well known. Mr. Money will have to pay his fair share, his proportionate share of that, but the cost is a known cost rather than some future unknown cost that is affected by inflation and other concerns. The fourth of 6 is to consider the need for additional land for development, including residential, commercial, or industrial. This would most certainly be industrial. Spanish Fork doesn't need it. I think the property owner needs it. The growth is happening now, and the development pressure is significant. The fifth of the 6 things is to consider including agricultural lands, as I mentioned. The only reason to include this agricultural land that Mr. Money It's because he's applied to the city, he's requested it, and it would likely be developed as industrial. And finally, the sixth is to be guided by the principles for annexation that are found in 102806. And those I've already discussed, the things about value and area. Let's see, what else? The boundaries and so on, eliminating the islands and peninsulas, which this would do, and avoid overlapping utilities and avoid inefficient delivery of services. So those are the things that we would consider in whether or not to amend our annexation policy plan. They weigh very heavily in favor of doing so, with the one on the other side of the ledger that it's also in Springville's annexation policy plan. In conclusion, the annexation is guided by the principles in 102806. It meets the requirements of 102804 and Spanish Fork's annexation policy plan. It promotes efficiency, avoids waste, and allows the property owner to proceed with his plans rather than waiting for some unknown future time. Spanish Fork carefully considered those things and amended its annexation policy plan, guided by its past dealings with Springville, including 6 annexations that are recent, that are still located within Springville's unamended annexation policy plan boundary. I'd ask you to do what Mr. Penrod asked, is just to weigh those criteria and make a decision. Like I mentioned, Spanish Fork doesn't have a big dog or in this fight or a need for this property. There's lots of other industrial property in Spanish Fork. I think we just fairly applied the criteria and the guidelines in the statute, and we'd ask you to come to a well-reasoned decision. I'm sure you will. Thank you.
Does anybody have questions for?
I do, if you
Okay.
would allow them. So when Mr. Money came to Spanish Fork asking to be annexed into Spanish Fork, was he advised at that time that his property was in the Springville annexation policy plan?
I wasn't the first point of contact. I don't have a personal knowledge of that. I would expect he was.
Would you like to address that? You can come on up, Mr. Money.
So prior to me going to Spanish Fork City, I met with what would you call that? What I did at Springville City Council, I went to their city council meeting and expressed to them what my desires were and what I was attempting to do.
To Spanish Fork City Council or
No,
to
to
Springville?
Springville City
So
Council.
when you put in your petition to the city of Spanish Fork, did they advise you that your property was in and that you needed to work with Springville, or did they? So I think that's where we're trying
Yeah,
to.
and I knew that it was in their annexation declaration area, as was
Okay.
all of that.
But I guess we want to know whether Spanish Fork City advised you that you were in there and that you needed to work with Springville, or did they just accept your application and proceed with that?
They accepted my application.
Okay.
They looked at the area, and again, those utilities right there. But one of the main reasons is Dry Creek. To get those utilities on the west side of Dry Creek will not be an easy task. So, no, they didn't. They just they accepted my petition.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have?
I just, I was trying to find it, but it seemed like in the city council minute meetings that were sent to us, that they acknowledged in the council meeting that it was part of the declaration annexation for Springville in that Spanish Fork City minute meetings. I was trying to locate it, but not able to do so that quick.
Did you have any other questions, Mayor Anderson?
No, thank you.
Anybody else? So I do have a question on for Mr. McCall. So State Code 10-2-802. which is part of the annex, which addresses the annexation policy plan. On section 3, in what way does Spanish Fork, in preparing a proposed annexation policy plan, it says the Planning Commission shall attempt to avoid gaps between or overlaps with the expansion areas of other municipalities. In what way does Spanish Fork's Planning Commission avoid that? Or how are they in line and comply with this subsection? I guess 3A.
Right. I think the language indicates that there will be overlaps. There can very likely be. You were required to attempt to avoid them, but that almost supposes that there can be. You might not be able to avoid them, right? We balanced it with everything. It was all the requirements. That's one of a list, and it was attempt to avoid, consider, be guided by, as I mentioned earlier. They considered that, but rather than deny a property owner's request, just allowed him to proceed each step of the way, and amended its policy plan.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have questions? Thank you for your presentation. We
Welcome.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Do we move on to discussions, or what is the process?
Have any other questions for those three parties? Let's take other questions now.
Okay. I actually do have a question for City of Springville. So I was wondering, in addressing Mr. Money's comment regarding the property to the west of the Money property, why that was allowed to be annexed into Spanish Fork, and why the line here. What's the significance to Springville City, and why you're protesting it when you didn't do that with the larger parcel to the west of it?
I have, again, the mayor and a couple of council members here. They might be better, since they made that decision, to answer that question. If I could just give an overall before they come up to answer that, you do see how the yellow part does go south of what we call 4 South, but everybody else calls it, I think, SR 77 out there. There is some overlap. And one of the reasons, and I don't know when that overlap came into play, but if you look to the bottom right of this picture, there's an airport. And at one point, we were joint ventures in that airport with Spanish Fork. And so at some point, the council decided, hey, we want to touch the airport. And I don't know if that was before 2001 when they had this annexation policy plan and everything else. But once they started to come in with petitions, we decided, hey, we'll stay north of 4 South, and we got out of the airport business. So just to answer that question, now to answer everything west of the Money property, and I apologize for kind of doing that roundabout. I just thought that'd be something you want to hear. Mayor, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Let me just maybe put a little flesh on the bones if I can. So the parcel of ground that is in question is they categorized as a GRC. That was purchased or optioned by the Clyde Company. And they came to us and they said, we would like to go to Spanish Fork because the utilities are just across the street. And we said, no, I don't think so. But in consideration for them, we sat down and said, let's do a feasibility study to see really what it would take to put the utilities to that 300 acres. And that's a long stretch from where the utilities are all the way to the very west side of it. They also told us that they were going to be they'd had some proposals to put in 3 companies that used as much water as Stofers. Now, we can show you records on how much water Stofers use, and if there's 3 of them, it would take a tremendous amount of water. And so that was part of the study that just didn't make sense to drive all of those pipes down to that 300 acres that was out there. The Money piece is not that far, and the Money piece is not part of that very large amount of effort to put that water down there. So I guess make it just as simple as I possibly can, we realized that in order to put the water down there that was needed for all of the industries that they wanted to do, it would be an insurmountable kind of cost, not only to the city, but to the property owners when the utilities to Spanish Fork. And so, in difference to the developer, we said it would be better for you to go that way. And we said we would not like to, the money piece was not in play in relationship to that conversation at all. Since the time that decision was made and that was put into Spanish Fork, GRC sold that to someone else. And so all of the idea of all those plants or the heavy water use, I don't believe is happening. I think what's going on down there are just tilt-ups. But that was the reason that the city council, after going through the study and going through the 6 months, we said, this is just going to not be a good experience for anybody involved in this. And that's why we chose to do it. Was it an unselfish act? We thought it was was better for GRC. It was better for Springville City, but that took an awful lot of effort to be able to get there because of the gentle competition that happens between cities. I mean, the Dons and the Devils, and you have all that goes on with that. But in the end, we realized that was a much better decision. The money piece, again, was not in play. We had understood that money piece was, he was going to continue to farm that and to use that. And so we did not consider it. We had discussions with the monies. They were quite interested in it as to when those utilities were coming down. And I think that what you're seeing now is that the development is working its way down into that area. We're not trying to hurt the monies. We're trying to create a situation to where we protect the boundaries and the boundary agreements that are in place for each of the cities in our valley. So anyway, I hope that answered the question.
Mayor, I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
If I may.
Yeah.
It sounds like when considering the Stockman Flat piece that you gave deference to the desires, the needs of the individual property owner. And it would seem that is in part the purpose of a municipality, is to protect the rights of the individuals, the citizens of the city. Why not show the same deference to the property owner, Mr. Money, in this case?
The difference is his acreage and the other GRC acreage is incredibly different. I mean, the GRC piece was a very, very large piece, plus that parcel was going to be used for some very, very high water use industries. And so that's why we thought it was in the best interest of Springville City to be able to allow that to take place. I mean, it wasn't a unselfish act. It was an act on which we thought it was the best thing for Springville City. This particular parcel with the money piece, we don't see that danger. We don't see the inability to provide those services within a reasonable period of time. Mr. Money, and I have great respect for him, and I don't think he's trying to lead you astray, but he talked about 5, 10, 15 years with developers who are talking with the Crandall piece. I don't think that's that far off. We've even, I haven't had any validation of this, but we've had word that a developer even approached Monies, who said they wanted
approaching maximum time limit for phone call duration. You may be disconnected from the conference soon. To have the system call you back at 801-851-8145.
Yeah,
Please press 1 now. Press any other key to decline callback.
But
yeah, sure.
And I'm not I don't work for city, so forgive me on that.
No.
It would seem that the role of the city is to protect the rights of the rights of the citizen. I mean, governments exist, in America, governments exist to protect the rights of the citizen, and the citizens have the rights. And it seems like you've shown in one case, in this, and the right, I understand the benefit to the city, but maybe I'm naive, maybe I'm informed, but it would seem that the rights of the individual is what should be foremost here, or at least highly considered, should it not?
Well, I understand where you're coming from. And I guess what you're trying to balance here is the concept of property rights as opposed to what cities are trying to do. to be able to create some sort of a plan to protect all of its citizens from taxation, over planning and putting into utilities that really don't need to be there. It doesn't do any good to put in substations, put in big truck lines if properties are not going to be put into the city. We have to protect the city. And I think that's the reason that they went through with those property values. But the difficult part is you're sitting and saying, how does that correct itself with property values? And I think that's really the crux of what's wrong.
I understand your point. Private property owners' rights, but I think the difference between the two properties, at least the way I'm understanding it, is that what my understanding was, but it doesn't have an industrial use. And my understanding was Springfield did not want to part of their city. Because part of the annexation is potential the city and that was what they put for the city. My understanding of is a little bit different in that it's going to be, is it going to be in the industrial zone or is it?
Directly to the east, that's residential. Is that correct? It's zone residential. So we're trying to create residential down there, not industrial. So the money piece, if you're looking at the money piece again, look at the acreage difference. It's pretty significant between the money piece and what was the GRC was. The use between those two is also pretty significant.
So, Mayor, and to this question, when making that determination on the Stockman Flats annexation, trying to avoid, as you pointed out, the duplication of efforts, the duplication of resources. We heard from Spanish Fork's attorney that is, by trying to develop the money piece into Springville, that's exactly what it does. Is it brings added infrastructure down there that is already existing by Spanish Fork and would potentially, and maybe I'm reading something into it, but would potentially create additional costs for the city of Springfield that would not be recouped because they're already there with Spanish Fork. Is that accurate, inaccurate?
Well, let me just add, that is everywhere you go in any city between cities. Utilities that are right next to each other, whether it's along freeway frontage or wherever, you're going to have utilities right next to each other eventually. Do they race past each other? Well, that's the arms race I was talking about that happened many years ago. So, John, maybe you add a little more to that.
I mean, in this situation, it could the infrastructure goes back to what's the purpose of the policy plan, because anybody can go out and put infrastructure anywhere. So, okay, now we're going to just take over this part that the city's been planning on doing in the city, because they'll build another simple separate stuff. And so in this case, I mean, really, the city should only be planning for what is in their policy plan, not for what is in other city's policy plan. And in this case, too, I mean, there's been a lot of talk about crossing Dry Creek and a few things like that. Dry Creek actually is a ways off of the money property where the Dry Creek is going to come through. So the Dry Creek, everything should come to his place and already have passed Dry Creek. And so you could say, hey, it's already there. But and the flip to that is, why is it already there? It's in the city's, meaning Springville City's policy plan. It's not in Spanish Forks. I mean, there's been talk that it's already to the west side and the south side, but in reality, it's in Springville's plan.
But to my understanding, the reason it's there is because Springville deferred to Spanish Fork to bring those utilities over to service something that Springville felt it wasn't in their best interest to service in the past, which necessitated that them to make that investment and bring it there. Is that correct?
Not for anyway. Go.
Yeah, and maybe to help you just a little bit, we're talking about over a long period of time. The property to the south that Spanish Fork talked about, that there's been other uh, parts to where Springville has let go. It's when the development on the north side of 4 South was it's Lakeside Landing. That was not even talked about. So the utilities were not even there. We would have had to drive a tremendous amount of utilities to get to that piece. And again, it was better off. Well, now the utilities are much, much closer. And that's why we think the money piece should also be in it. So we're not afraid to give up ground if we think that it's going to cost the city an awful lot of money to put in heavy trunk lines. But when we think that in a reasonable period of time that's going to be done by the city, that those properties should be done. If we had, for example, utilities to the Crandall piece, and the GRC came to us at that time after those utilities were in, we probably would be looking at GRC and say, you know what, our utilities are within 100 feet or 300 feet of where you are. We're going to have you stay in Springville. So we were trying to balance that with the reasonableness of what we would expect a citizen to understand.
Also, too, if I just could add, 130 acres of development brings a lot of needed capacity to a property or to infrastructure coming to that property. The only way that this could have happened so that now they can go into Spanish Fork would be if Spanish Fork intended to bring this into them all the time and not really look at Springville's annexation policy plan. And so in essence, that's just a lot of capacity that they're looking to take on. And one of the things we've been doing is building our capacity, trying to get everything out there to service this property. And so by saying, hey, we're just going to let go of this property, that also takes away costs of planning and other upsizing costs that we've already put into effect to try to service this property as well. 100 acres of property is quite a bit to service.
May I speak, Madam
Yes.
Chair? Okay. I think what's important to remember is that we are not discussing other annexations that have happened before. We're only talking about this property right now. And does the annexation of this property adhere to annexation policy plan code? So that's what we're looking at. We need to look at the code to see if this particular property and its annexation plan, having been in Springville's annexation plan, then recently brought into Spanish Forks, does that meet state code? So we've heard the explanations of why the other properties were annexed, and it makes sense on both ways. But what we need to look at is this particular property and does it meet code to allow them to stay with Springville or be brought over into Spanish Fork? So I think that's the main question today.
So I do have a question for our lawyer, county lawyer, as far as state code and having two municipalities with annexation plans that have the same piece of property in unincorporated Utah County. How is that? Is that solely by the Boundary Commission, or are there other guidelines outside of the codes that we've already been shown?
Yes, we will discuss that in deliberations.
Okay. Okay, doke. Any other questions for the three parties that we heard from? Okay, if not, we will open, you said a public hearing, right?
Motion and vote on opening public.
Okay, can I get a motion for a public hearing?
I'll make a motion to open the public hearing.
Okay, we've got a motion. Can I have a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor to go into a public hearing? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, any opposed? Okay, we'll open up the public hearing. So this is the portion of the meeting where we allow the public to come up and make a statement regarding this issue. We ask that when you come up that you state your name very clearly in the microphone, and then and you have 3 minutes to make that statement.
My name is Clayton Rackham with the Clyde Capital Group, previously known as GWC, and I appreciate the effort to not deliberate too much on previous annexations, but I do think our annexation of the 320 acres directly west of this property is extremely relevant based on everything you've heard today. And I guess from a developer's perspective, if that means anything to anyone, and the costs of what it does to landowners, I think I have a unique insight into that, and to Mr. Money's presentation and how this affects him personally. I think he said it best when he spoke to both city councils and said 130 acres of developable land doesn't mean a lot to Spanish Fork City. In a tax revenue sense, it doesn't mean a lot to Springville City in a tax or utility sense, but to him personally, it means a lot. And any additional cost to get utilities to his property affects what a developer or he himself pays to get his property marketable and changed from any use from agriculture to industrial or from agricultural to residential. So I just wanted to make that public comment. Thank you all.
Thank you.
My name is Tom Brockbank, and I just would like to remind this body of the importance of the landowner's rights here. We argue about as though this land somehow belongs to Springville City or Spanish Fork City, when in fact it belongs to the landowner. And he should be able to self-direct where his ground goes. There's been discussion whether this is a Don's or a devil's thing, and it's not. What the landowner is asking here is the same thing that any of us would ask this body to consider if it were our personal property. So I'd ask you to give that serious weight and consideration. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is there anybody else?
My name is Brandon Snyder. I work for Spanish Fork City, live in Springville City, previously worked for Springville City. So this is quite an entertaining saga to sit through and watch. One thing that I did want to clarify was when Mr. Money did meet with the city, we did make it very clear to him up front that it was in Springville City's annexation policy plan. There is quite a bit of history that we don't need to go into. I was there in Springville at a council meeting when Stockman Flats was being discussed. I was also there in May of this year when Mr. Money went to the Springville City Council. That was on May 6th. And I have their minutes here where he made his request. And then the signed and notarized petition for annexation was May 12th. We did have numerous discussions with Mr. Money. And in fact, some of those were during the Stockman Flats consideration. And so I just wanted to make that clarification known. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, we will close the public hearing and then move on. I'm sorry.
Motion closed.
Oh, is it? Okay. I will entertain a motion to, I didn't realize that. I don't think I've ever closed a public hearing that way. Okay, may I get a motion? I will entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to close the public hearing. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, public hearing is closed. I assume we're going into deliberations at this point.
If you commissioners are done asking any questions of any of the parties, yes.
Okay.
This might be your last chance to ask them anything that you need to know.
Okay, if nobody has questions for our three parties that are in deliberation today, I think we'll just go ahead and go into deliberations.
Okay.
Is deliberations open or closed?
It's closed to the public. Yeah, we'll close the room now.